Welcome to Everything All Right, where the most amazing authors talk about the best books. And before I introduce my guest today, I will have to get ready for her and the fabulous creature she is describing. So here is my mink stole. And I do think I have to... Okay. Welcome to Everything All Right, the uber-talented Daisy Goodwin, who is speaking about her new historical fiction novel, which is entitled Diva.
That's right.
That's right. Well, here we go, Daisy. It takes one, I suppose, to know one. Tell us how you came to choose Maria Callas as a subject for your third novel.
Fourth novel, actually.
Sorry.
Doesn't matter. I chose Maria Callas because I'd always been a fan. I started listening to her when I was a little girl. Because my mother loved her music, and so I sort of associated Callas's voice with Happy Times with My Mother, and so that kept Callas as part of my life growing up. And I would listen to Callas at moments of high drama. Nothing I like more than, the kind of romantic thing of listening to Callas singing her head off as I drove very fast away from some, disappointing romantic situation. And then I happened to see there was a wonderful documentary about Callas about 5 years ago, and it's called Callas in Her Own Words. And somehow seeing her on screen talking about her life made me very curious. And I thought, this would be a fantastic subject for a novel. And of course, I've written about women. I think I like writing about strong women sort of dealing with the hand that fate has dealt them. Queen Victoria becoming queen at 18, Maria Callas being born with this amazing voice, which of course is a huge gift, but it leaves you with this problem. Do people love you, or do they love your voice? And it's the same problem that Victoria has. Does anyone love her for herself? Even Cece, the person I wrote about in The Fortune Hunter, the Empress of Austria. Is it me or is it my beauty? Everybody can feel insecure about these things. So I find that's a very good starting place for a novel and for exploring a character.
Speaking about starting places and disappointed sort of romantic situations, the book really starts at when the Callas is at her low point. No spoilers, but how much is fact and how much is fiction in Diva? How did you weave both together?
Well, all the facts in it are real. Are facts. It's based on the story of her life. The problem with Maria is that there aren't many actual facts because the record keeping wasn't great. Pretty much everybody disputes everything. The people that wrote about her, who were closest to her, were all parti pris. So, there were books by her sister, her mother, her ex-husband, the pianist who accompanied her on her last concert tour. And what there isn't is a kind of really definitive biography which has every fact in it rock solid. I've read so many different accounts of various episodes in her life. So in the end, I decided the only way I could make sense of this was in a novel, and I would use my novelist's eye to get to what I thought was Maria's true self. And I think, well, I don't know, I haven't met her, but obviously I didn't meet her, but I feel that, yes, that's crazy. But what I think I have done is to give the reader a sense of what it's like to be an opera singer at that level, and also what it's like to be terrified of losing your voice, because I think that was really her greatest fear. When she met, losing Onassis was one thing, but losing her voice was really the end of her world. And I have to say, I don't think that Onassis would have been, would have been the significant figure in her life that he was if her voice had still been up and running. Do you know what I mean? I
No,
feel
she
that,
would have always had her voice as an anchor. Absolutely, you know.
yes,
And
yes.
you do bring this emotion across really fantastically. It's an irresistible read from the first page onwards. And so, of course, you mentioned that you've read all these books from her sister, her mother, her former husband. And there's a question to that later on to actually her seeking love and did she ever find it? But how did you get this emotion in? What other research did you do? Listen to her music, you know, I saw on Instagram that you had a lot about her costumes on stage, you know, getting closer to the woman she was.
Oh, I mean, there were lots of things I did. I mean, I listened to all her music all the time, every day that I was writing the book. I mean, I was steeped in it. I took singing lessons, which probably was the most useful thing I could have done because that really taught me to, it helped me understand who she was and how she would have stood and what her daily routine would have been like. You know, she would have spent every morning warming up her voice, and that takes an hour, and it's a very sort of visceral thing. And I realized that, you know, for Maria, she's this musical genius, but her voice is, it's not like having a violin and leaving it on the train. You know, there were days when, you know, her relationship with her voice was tricky. It was her great weapon, her superpower, but there were days when it just wouldn't come. And, you know, I think despite all her training and everything else, I think when she was in moments of emotional crisis, the voice was the first thing to go. So it was a kind of physical thing and an emotional thing. Physically, her voice began to go much earlier than it should have done. When you think that someone like Joan Sutherland, who was singing the same kind of bel canto roles, went on until her 50s, you know, I think she was still singing at 60. It's extraordinary that Maria was already having problems in her 30s. And that's too short a career for someone with a voice like that. But I think the reason for that is that she was so good, so young, that she just sang everything. You know, she did everything because she could, because she was this, you know, phenomena. And I think that, and I think nobody said to her, none of the men that surrounded her, Tita or Tullio Serafin, who was the conductor that really discovered her, or even Zeffirelli or Visconti, or any of these men that surrounded her, none of them said to her, really, Maria, you should stop now and, you know, conserve your power so that when you get to the, you know, in a decade, you will still be singing at the same sort of volume and brilliance that you are now. And the great sadness of this, I think, for, well, certainly for anybody who cares about Maria, is that, of course, by, you know, by her 30s, by her 40s, she, you know, her acting was always wonderful, but it became so good. I mean, you've only got to watch that last act of, you know, the second act of Tosca, which is one of the very few performances she gives that's on a screen, that's on YouTube, and you can just watch it. And you see that she's extraordinary. She totally commands the stage. She makes opera make sense in a way that I've seen few other people do. I mean, you suddenly understand what it's all about when you watch that. And when she's, you know, the last 5 minutes, when she's just walking around the stage and there's no music, there's music, but she's not singing, are mesmerizing. She's got total command of what's going on. And it makes you realize that, you know, what a shame that her voice gave out so early, because she had so much more to contribute. And I think that is a great, great tragedy. And, you know, I mean, people said that, you know, she lost her voice because she lost so much weight, or because, you know, she was too busy drinking and smoking with the masses, but none of that was true. I think it was literally that she was like an athlete. She played,
Gave
you know.
too much too early. Yeah, yeah. And do you think too that teaching has moved on? Teaching, could anybody learn to sing? Are you say it takes an hour to warm up the voice? I suppose you wouldn't give us a little rendition now.
Oh,
Am I lucky? World premiere
oh
of
God.
Daisy
I mean,
Goodwin.
caro. I can't can't do any more than that. But
oh,
anyway,
I love that. I will post that as a sort of warm up, if I may. But
you
you
may.
really capture her so well. This woman who's half volcano and a half vulnerable child, forever looking for love. Is it actually true that Onassis never came to watch her, to listen to her? And do you think she ever found love? It's so tragic.
Well, I think Anastas did see her perform. I think he was constantly finding better things to do because he wasn't really that interested in music. But to be honest, and also I suspect that Onassis was such an egotist that he really only wanted to be at something where he was the center of attention, possibly. And although he might have liked to go thinking she's mine, I think that he was really only interested in Maria as a possession rather than as a great artist. I think finding love, it's a very tricky thing, isn't it? I mean, she certainly found passion with Onassis, and I think there was a bond between them that was more than just delusion on her part and covetousness on his. I think they were both Greek. They had this language in common, which, there they were in the sort of middle of cafe society, and everyone's speaking English or French or Italian, and they have this language that only they can understand. That's a very potent sort of bond between them. And also they were both self-made. They both came from, very kind of disadvantaged families, and they made their own fortunes. They made their own luck. And again, that's totally different to the people who surrounded them both, who were, aristocrats or playboys or people who'd sort of had life easy, and neither of them had. So I think they had more in common than just a sort of, than just a coup de foudre. I mean, there was something very strong between them. And I think that Onassis was just enthralled to the idea of, when he saw the opportunity of marrying Jackie, he couldn't resist it because it was, his chance to take on America. He was viewed as a criminal by a lot of Americans, by Bobby Kennedy in particular. And this was an enormous sort of fuck you to them. And they didn't get married, of course, until Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. And I think there was a connection between that Jackie couldn't have married Onassis until that happened. And I think also Jackie was a skilled manipulator of men, which I don't think Maria was. Maria was a kind of a completely authentic person who said it as she saw it.
Yeah, and passionate and giving, just as she felt it. I once read, I think that Kennedy even had in her contract how often she would have to make love to, and says it's crazy. But anyways, let's circle back to you and your work, and let's go way back. So you create so much, and your name stands for so much. How did you get into writing or the creative world of words?
Well, I suppose I grew up in a sort of creative background. My mother was a writer. My father was a film producer, is a film producer. He's still alive. And I suppose I started reading very early, and my parents divorced when I was young, and I sort of retreated into books for years. I mean, I was a very, very bookish child. And I was short-sighted, couldn't play games, was very good at school because all I did was read. And I suppose I always thought one day I'm going to write a novel, but I never really kind of thought I could. And I went into television, I made lots of TV programs, and that was very satisfying because that's, it played to my strengths. You have to be creative, you have to have a good idea, you have to get on with people, you have to charm them into doing things they possibly don't want to do. You have to be quite good at organizing, and it's a very fulfilling and brilliant job. But there comes a point when you feel, okay, done that, been there, done that. Unless you're really, really interested in money, which I mean I am. I like Maria Callas, I have no interest in money. So I'm paid more than anyone else, but that's what she said. But
in cash. In cash.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely in cash. I felt there was something missing, and so one day, first of all, I wrote a memoir, and that I think was the thing that unlocked my writing, because having written this memoir, having got, put my childhood, which had its demons, in a box, in a book, I was free to kind of make things up. And so I just had this idea for my first book, My Last Duchess, The American Heiress. And from going to Blenheim and seeing Consuelo Vanderbilt there, seeing the portrait, the famous Sargent portrait, where she's at one side of the painting and he's on the other, and they obviously hate each other. And I thought, oh, that's a fascinating, setup for a novel. And that was a joy. And your first novel, as you know, Ellen, is a joy to write, because you have no idea what to expect. And the thing I loved about it was I realized as I started writing that, that thing that you hear writers say, which is your characters take over. Well, it's true, they do. And then you suddenly find yourself in this wonderful state of having to sit down at your desk before you know what's going to happen next. So it's almost as if you're reading the novel with the reader. Reading as you're writing. I find that it's a process of discovery always.
Absolutely. And you already given the cue to my next question. So what is next for you? Sip of tea.
So I've written a play, which I hope will get produced. I've written a play. I'm beginning to write a new TV series, which again has a pretty good chance of happening. And I'm started work on a new novel, and I think it's the one I'm going to write. It's back to Victoria, but it's a very different Victoria from the one I wrote about before. So it's about her, it's called, it's a working title is After Albert, and it's really about a woman coming to terms with the loss of her husband, but really also finding her own identity in the process. So that doesn't make it, it's quite, it's almost an emotional thriller, I think. But until I've written it, I don't really know.
So how do you structure, because all that is quite work and word intensive, how do you structure your working day? Do you say, okay, the first 3 hours are for After Albert, and then the TV series, and then the play? Or how do you split up your working week?
I can only do one thing at a time. So if I'm writing, well, I can only do one creative job a day. I can't do, writing a novel in the morning, writing a screenplay in the afternoon. If only I could do that, I would be, incredibly successful. But I can't. I can only. I've got 3 or 4 hours of good creative effort in me a day, and so, whatever is the most urgent thing on my to-do. But I can do that, and then I could write an article in the afternoon. But I couldn't do that, and I can only do one thing at a time on a day. But I could go from, and ideally I'd have a run at it. So if I'm going to write a screenplay, which I can do in about 8 or 9 days, then I'll just do it, and then I'll go back to, and then I'll go back to something else, so I don't like going from one to the other, because it's very difficult to keep your concentration.
So what is your top tip to any NASA novelist? Get that 3-4 hours of creative energy. Get those.
My tip, and it's really simple, is to decide how many words you're going to write, whether it's 500, 1,000, 7,000, whatever it is. And when you sit down, decide that's how much I'm going to write. And you don't stop until you've done that. So you don't let yourself, give up until you've got to your word count. And in a sense, it doesn't even matter whether it's good or not. Don't go back and sort of go over it and get into a state. Just carry on and write 1,000 words until you've got a really good chunk, and then go back and have a look at it. Because if you start to read it immediately, you will start self-censoring and self-editing, and you don't really know what you've got. I think you need to write at least 50,000 words, and then you can perhaps go back over it. But I think that's the only way to do it. Don't let, perfection stand in the way of the good. You've got to really give yourself a crack at it. And because I think so many writers just think, oh, this is terrible, I can't go on. And it's, you know, it may be terrible, but you can go on. And if you do go on, you will find a way of making it less terrible. And then you'll find you've got a story and it will all come together. That is, if you're capable of telling a story. Some people aren't, some people cannot write. But, you know, there aren't that many of them.
It is an art, exactly, and just finding the beginning to that art. And we've actually come to the end of our talk. We just have the 5 faves to deal with, Daisy. Are you ready? Very spontaneously. What's your favorite movie?
Brief Encounter.
What's your favorite book?
Persuasion, Jane Austen.
What's your favorite music? Opera.
Anything by Maria Callas.
Okay, favorite food?
Favorite truth?
No, food.
Oh, favorite food.
I'm not that intrusive.
Dark chocolate.
And your favorite travel destination?
Rome.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much for watching Everything All Right. My guest today was Daisy Goodwin, who spoke about her 4th novel, Diva. Order it online or get it in your local bookstore, which is much better. My name is Ellen Alpsten, and watch us next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Bye.
Bye.